Alright, what's up guys? It's the Ascension of Babylon. What we do is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual self-development and spirituality in general, and we talk about the healing process. If that is your thing and you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. You can hit that notification bell because I am going to be posting very consistently. And if you're in resonance with what I'm sharing, you can hit that like button, And I am recovering from being sick, so if I sneeze, if I have a little bit of brain fog maybe, forgive me. Anyways, we're going to be talking about Babylon. Babylon is a very powerful, also very misunderstood, primal goddess. And this primal goddess is mainly very feared because of religious programming. A lot of people know Babylon either from the works of Aleister Crowley, which are also very misunderstood, or from the book of Revelations, which most people have learned to understand from a religious lens. And in my opinion, that's not necessarily the healthiest, most authentic way to actually understand anything in the Bible, especially the book of Revelations, where there's actually a lot of very rich symbolism that you're going to see that can actually help you better understand your own evolutionary process if you know how to read that symbolism properly. So Babylon is a multi-dimensional field of energy that is operating on a spectrum. And there are actually different goddess figures throughout time that are projections of this field of energy. Projections that are intended to interact with the collective consciousness in a different way depending on the archetype or depending on the projection, so the human race can actually better know itself. So there's a stimulation of certain parts of the subconscious and certain parts of the unconscious as these different god forms, or more specifically goddess forms, were being worshipped throughout history and throughout time. And I did say god forms, I was more specifically talking about goddess forms, like Inanna and Ishtar, maybe even Isis and beings like that. But I do believe there are masculine projections of this current as well, even though Babylon actually represents the suppressed divine feminine consciousness. But, wherever there's feminine, there's going to be masculine, and wherever there is masculine, there will be feminine as well. So there are very likely different kinds of fertility entities that have a lot of the same characteristics as Inanna or Ishtar, so love, war, things of that nature. There are probably masculine entities that are connected and are projections of the multi-dimensional field of energy that we call Babylon today. And the information that I'm sharing with you isn't necessarily something that you're going to find in books or that is commonly talked about, even though I know there are occult practitioners that do agree with the perspective that I'm sharing, the perspective that Babylon isn't just one thing, but is a multi-dimensional field of energy operating on a spectrum that is comprised of these different goddess and even god forms that are being projected from this field of energy to the mass collective consciousness, so human beings can get to better know themselves. So once again, Babylon is this field of energy. Now, Babylon is also an archetypal personification of what we call the void. And when we're connecting with Babalon, because she's this archetypal personification of the void, we start to enter very liminal spaces within self, and very liminal spaces that are actually considered to be outside of not only our created reality and our life experience, but outside of the organized, structured cosmos in general. And this is also why there can be quite a lot of catalyst when we're working with Babalon, because there's a process of preparation that needs to take place to prepare the body and to prepare the nervous system to start energetically interacting with these spaces that can be very challenging for the conditioned and programmed ego to understand, to grasp, and to even accept, because usually our ego is built on a sense of needing to know, built on a sense of linearity, and built within a sense of usually a false structure and order. There's nothing wrong with structure and order, but when that's a false structure and order, that's usually actually rooted in the fear of feeling certain emotions that are associated with trauma. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing. So Babalon is everything that actually challenges this false sense of order that the ego usually hangs on to, so that order can actually get reordered through the process of deconstruction. This deconstruction process is actually necessary for us to actually enter these more liminal states of awareness and liminal states of consciousness, because the way the ego is programmed and conditioned as it is for most people, it would not be able to enter those states that are very lucid in their nature. They're not what the ego is used to. So there can be a lot of catalyst when it comes to working with Babalon. There's a lot of deconditioning, excuse me, and there's a lot of letting go that needs to take place as we get pulled into these different dying death cycles. So a death cycle is when death energy starts to flood our body and starts to flood our life. This is the energy of change. It is an energy that takes one thing and it transfers it or changes it into another thing. So this could be being addicted to something and then we're not addicted to that thing. This could be being in a relationship and then there's a breakup or a conflict that manifests to initiate that breakup. This could be having a home to being homeless or having to downsize to an apartment. This could be having an apartment and upgrading to a home. Whenever there's death, there's going to be change. And oftentimes as human beings, we're very much in resistance to change, because going back to what I said about the ego earlier, it feels safe when there's structure. It feels safe when there's a sense of order or form, even if that order or form is not actually in alignment with our highest evolutionary benefit. So Babalon is this field of energy that when we start interacting with it, there will also be a death energy that comes into our physical body, and that even, is going to manifest in our lives. It'll manifest at work, it'll manifest in our relationships, and of course it's going to manifest in our psyche and in our physical body. Within the psyche, it's going to be dissolving, protective layering that's keeping us from deeper levels of vulnerability. And of course, within the body, it's going to start bringing up deeply suppressed emotions that we built the protective layering within our psyche to actually disassociate from. And as, death energy is changing our mental and our emotional states, all of this is also going to actually externalize itself to some degree in our external reality in the form of different trials and even tribulations, or at least we can see it that way if we want to, that are archetypal personifications of the negative personality traits and identities that are being dissolved by that death energy, and of the suppressed emotions and traumas that are now actually able to come to the surface because of the dissolution of the protective layering that was acting like a dam, separating the mind from what is going on in the body. And that's actually where a lot of these traumas that we suppress are going to stick, And that's where these emotions are going to come through. When you feel emotions, you feel them in your body. So there's a major dissolution process that is taking place when we're connecting with this field of energy that we call Babalon. And I would say that Babalon is actually one of the more challenging, one of the more challenging forces to actually work with. Which is why I would say in the modern day, especially if you take a look at like the online occult space, Babalon is one of the less popular beings. People are much more preoccupied with working with other infernal divine entities and infernal entities and, beings like that. Because there's this deep process of shadow integration that is required to work with Babalon. And whether a person knows it or not, on the surface they might just say, I'm not interested in working with Babalon. But underneath the surface, they probably know that they're not ready for the very deep and sometimes catalytic process that is going to unfold working with this force. So Babalon is a force that requires a capacity that is built over time in order to work with, Babalon. Now, Babalon, being a personification of the void, means she brings us into these liminal spaces that exist outside of anything that we've created in our lives, and outside of the cosmos itself, meaning the cosmic laws, the structure, and the order that exists within the created universe. So this is a state that is very formless, and it has no pre-given or predefined definition yet. It is just this formless energy of infinite potential that is unmanifest. It has not manifest into anything yet. And although this is very challenging for the human body and the human psyche to grasp, when you embrace that void state, you are actually able to manifest from this unmanifest space, which is actually paradoxically holding infinite potential and an infinite amount of probable realities that just hasn't taken form yet within the created universe. So you're going into that void space, and when you come out of that void space, you actually have the ability to create what you want to create, and to actually make what you may have thought to be impossible possible, because you're actually pulling from infinite probability. but there is a dissolving process that is required to enter this space, and there is a letting go of predefined outcome and needing to always know, and needing, the crows are confirming, and needing to always structure your reality in a certain way. It requires taking a leap of faith, and it requires really trusting the process and trusting that when you go into that space, even though you may have no idea what is going to emerge from it, you know that whatever comes out of that liminal state is going to be something that is in alignment with your highest evolutionary benefit. And this can be, once again, quite challenging because the ego, it needs evidence. It needs some type of science to back up what is going to manifest. But all of that goes out the window when we're working with Babalon, because once again, she is a personification of the void. Now, Babalon is said to lead us to the abyss. And what the abyss actually is within, or from the lens of Kabbalah, is going to be this threshold within ourselves that separates the old self from the new self that is going to be forming. It separates the bottom of the tree, so the first 7 spheres, from the upper part of the tree. It separates higher states of awareness and consciousness from lower states of awareness and consciousness. So when we go into the abyss, we are bridging the gap between the conscious self and what is in the unconscious, so we can connect the conscious self with the unconscious to start funneling in to our ego, which is our sense of self, these higher states of consciousness and these higher states of awareness that are symbolized by the upper 3 spheres on the Kabbalistic tree, which are going to be Bina, Chokmah, and Kether. Kether is representing our God self, our source energy connection before it polarized itself into a masculine and feminine form. So the crossing of the abyss, as most people know it, is actually us building this bridge between the conscious self and the unconscious self, so we can start in a sustainable way accessing the upper chakras that the supernal triad, the 3 Sephirot that I mentioned, are representing. So whether a person actually associates Babalon with the Kabbalistic system or not, Babalon is very much associated with this process and is very much actually a guiding force. This is why she is known as being a consort of choronzon. So choronzon is 1/2 of the beast of 666. So the beast of 666, which is actually made reference to in the book of Revelations, but we're not going to get into that now. But the beast of 666 is both Shugal, being the masculine polarity of this force, and is associated with the Sephirothic tree, and choronzon, which is the feminine polarity of this force, which is associated with the Klipothic tree. And these are the gatekeepers that are going to initiate you through that threshold that we call the abyss. And this is a built-in threshold that every single one of us have. And what it does is it acts as a barrier between the conscious self and the unconscious self, because within the realm of the unconscious self are going to be parts of us that we may not actually have the capacity to process, and even higher states of awareness and consciousness that are accessible to us but could be dangerous to us if we are not prepared. So what actually prepares us to start accessing the higher chakras, or, the higher spheres on the Kabbalistic tree, is going to be the beast of 666. Once again, if you're working with the Qliphoth, it's likely going to be choronzon that you have a confrontation with. And choronzon will actually be a personification of the most rejected parts of yourself, and maybe even negative personality traits that you're not really owning within yourself that would actually prevent you from crossing the abyss. And if we're talking about the Sephiroth, we are talking about Shugal. And Shugal is going to operate in the same way. Shugal will cloak himself in the most rejected parts of yourself that need to be processed, and even different identities and negative personality traits that you might have that would prevent you from actually building that bridge, from actually bridging the gap between the lower self and higher states of awareness, or, the conscious self and the unconscious self that actually holds within its blueprint infinite probability that you can start manifesting your reality from. These are the most raw, unfiltered aspects of your being, but you have to meet the guardian of the threshold in order to start accessing these aspects in a way that is actually sustainable for your evolutionary process. Babylon guides you into this process, and she guides you to the beast of 666, so you can actually, enter that doorway that we call Doth, so you can better know yourself in that process, shed aspects of the ego that are not serving your process anymore, and that would act as an interfering pattern or frequency between you and the upper chakras that the top of the Kabbalistic tree actually represents. So Babylon, whether a person knows it or not, or accepts this or not, is actually a very important part of, the Kabbalistic initiatory process, both through the Sephiroth and through the Qliphoth. Babylon is also an important part of this process because she can be a representation of the Kundalini energy as well, and an initiator that will manifest certain experiences for us that raise that Kundalini energy through the chakras. And even though the Kundalini is not conventionally associated with Kabbalistic initiation, to those of us that actually understand this process, we know that they are directly connected. The Kabbalistic tree is just a representation of us. So when we're raising ourselves through the Kabbalistic tree in the form of initiation, we're also raising our Kundalini energy through the chakras, because the spheres that we're working with are also directly associated with the chakra system. So all of this is actually connected. Now, Babylon is also associated with the sphere of Bina. And Bina is a part of the supernal triad. And it is governed by Saturn. So we have Kether, the raw, unfiltered source energy force, or we can even say God energy or God consciousness. That raw force then polarizes itself into both masculine and feminine. That raw force, turns into Chokmah, which is like this primal spark of inspiration that hasn't necessarily taken a tangible form yet. You can think of this as being like an idea that comes to your mind, but you haven't really nurtured that idea to become something tangible in your reality. So that idea, or the primal spark of Chokmah, then is inserted into Bina, which represents the sacred womb. And this sacred womb actually holds the template in which all things become possible from that primal template. Babylon being associated with Bina also means that she represents that primal template inside of us. So when we're working with Babylon, we're accessing the primal template that gives us the ability to redefine our reality in a very profound and in a very significant way that can completely change the way our nervous system operates, can completely change the way that we perceive ourselves, and can completely change the way that we are creating our reality. So Bina is that feminine womb. The same way that there's a process of being nurtured when we are in our mother's womb. We haven't come into the physical world yet, but we're being nurtured and we're being cared for within the womb. This is actually what Bina represents. Therefore, this is what Babylon represents as well. She is that primal mother that our soul desires to return to. So we can actually begin to redefine ourselves when we emerge from that primal womb. Now, Aleister Crowley was said to believe in a concept known as the Scarlet Woman. And what the Scarlet Woman actually is going to be a woman who takes on the energetic influence of Babylon and actually becomes a channel for this energy. So in relation to Aleister Crowley, he had many different Scarlet Women who would show up in his life in ways that to the average person would probably seem supernatural at times. And I've had this happen in my life as well. It's a natural byproduct of connecting with the goddess Babylon. So Aleister Crowley would attract these different partners and women that he would work with, and these women were meant to be catalysts for profound evolutionary processes and profound change to take place within the self. So when we're working with Babylon in the modern time, you will probably notice that that Babylon will show up in the opposite sex. Now, if you're not really into the opposite sex, if you're a woman who likes women, or you are a man who likes men, then Babylon can still show up in the same sex as well. But the Scarlet Woman is going to be typically a woman who is taking on the energy of Babylon. This can happen in a way that this kind of person is conscious of, but I've also seen it happen in ways where the person had no idea that they were being influenced by Babylon. And these are experiences that we will magnetize to ourselves to act as evolutionary triggers. And I've noticed that there's more temporary Scarlet Woman manifestations. Maybe Babylon just shows up through a person to shatter an illusion I had about myself, to challenge my sense of self-identity in the moment, to be a trigger to bring up certain emotions, and then when I process what I need to, that person will leave my life. Maybe just to deliver a very quick message, and I'll know, oh, this is a communication from Babylon coming through this person who may not even be aware of it. And then there's actually more, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry, I'm sick and I'm having a big brain fart. I can't even think of the word. Oh my gosh. There's more long-lasting, there we go, why was that so hard? There's more long-lasting relationships that will be formed as well. And the most significant, impactful relationship that I have formed with the opposite sex, with a feminine who was taking on the energy of Babylon, was with this really incredible woman, and we went through an evolutionary process known as the raising of the bride initiation. And I'm not going to be explaining that in this video because there's just a lot to explain, and I would rather make another video about it. But to show you how tangible and how real this stuff is, even though getting into this deeper initiatory process, we didn't actually understand, or excuse me, can't even talk today, God. We didn't know this. This woman that I'm talking about was actually born on Aleister Crowley's birthday, and she didn't even know this right away. So think about how crazy that is, right? How all of this is connected to some of the work of Aleister Crowley. And, I attract this woman to go through this really deep evolutionary process with, and this profound process of transformation. Come to find out, as we're going through this process, we uncover that she's actually born on Aleister Crowley's birthday. So I do think that was important to add, to show you the nature of how profound these manifestations can actually be. But this person, for me, was a trigger for profound change to take place within myself, and she acted as a doorway for me to step into levels of authenticity that I was not actually embodying prior. And of course, I acted as a doorway for her to do the very same thing. And now, me and her are both very different people in relation to how we started that evolutionary process. So let me think if there's anything else that I want to add. I think that's it. So I think this covers everything that I wanted to say in this video for the most part. If I forget something, I'll just make if I forgot something, I'll just make another video. I do have a little bit of brain fog because I'm recovering from being sick. That's it, I think. So this is the goddess Babylon in a nutshell. There's so much more I could add because there's so much depth to what Babylon is and how Babylon will manifest in our lives. Babylon is a major part of the initiatory process. So if you're working with the Qliphoth or you're working with the Sephiroth, even if you're not aware of it now, if you self-reflect, you may actually be able to kind of trace the energy of Babylon and how it was showing up, even if you weren't consciously interacting with this force. So thank you very much for being here. I appreciate every single one of you, and I will catch you in the next video.